Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we are back. We are here again with another off-season preview, and today we're going to be doing the Denver Nuggets and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we'll start with the Denver Nuggets, and they had a great offseason, I would say. One of the strongest offseasons in the league, definitely one of the strongest offseasons in the West. We know what this team was able to do last year. Last year, they had a very tumultuous regular season where they got off to a slow start, right? They signed Russell Westbrook to replace some of the guys that they didn't really have going into the season. He did play very well for them. It didn't work quite as well against Oklahoma City, but overall he had a good season. They finished with 50 wins. They fired Michael Malone and replaced him with David Adelman, and they were able to get all the way to the second round and lost in 7 to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So the season ended, I think, better than what we kind of thought, because I think we went into the season not quite as high on the Nuggets. And, you know, we didn't pick them to beat Oklahoma City. We actually had them losing in 5, but they ended up, you know, really taking Oklahoma City the distance and seemed like a really strong matchup against them. But now, going into this offseason, they've actually done a real decent job. Forgot to mention, they fired their GM as well as Michael Malone, right? Calvin Booth, and replaced him with an interim guy. And he immediately got to work in the summer. So you look at the moves that they were able to do. The biggest one, right, was trading Michael Porter Jr. in a 2032 unprotected first for Cam Johnson, right? Cam Johnson, if you remember, used to be a Phoenix Sun, was on that finals team that took the Bucks to 6 games. And he's been a Brooklyn Net for the last few years because he was in the Kevin Durant trade, right? And these guys, I would say, are similar tiers of players, right? I don't think, you know, whichever one you think is better is not significantly better than the other. The main thing is that for the Nuggets, it helped save them so much money. It allowed them to get below both the first and the second apron, which also opened up a ton of flexibility for them. When you look at Cam Johnson, the player, right? Last year, he basically had, in statistics wise, right, one of his best seasons, right? 19 a game, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, basically 40 from the field, 40 from 3, 48 from the field, but only 57 games. And that's one of the first potential concerns, is just that even though Michael Porter Jr. has been labeled as an injury-prone guy, he's actually been the more available player the last few seasons, right? The last few seasons, you know, he's by and large played almost every game, which is actually pretty impressive considering where he was, you know, coming into the NBA, right? Because he had the back issues in college, and then they kind of plagued the early first couple seasons in the NBA, but he played 77 games last year, played 81 the year before. So pretty strong there. But the thing is with Cam Johnson is I do think he's better at some of the other little things than Michael Porter Jr. is, right? Like being able to make the extra pass, make the extra read, attack off of closeouts. So it's kind of the question of, like we mentioned with some of the trades in the past, maybe one player might be quote unquote more talented as an individual, but then the other player is just better suited within a team. And that would probably be Cam Johnson. And he was a part of a team that went to the finals, so it's not like he's never been on a good basketball team before. So I think he'll be able to fit right in and be able to kind of do a lot of the Michael Porter Jr. stuff. Maybe the explosiveness may not be quite as high just because, you know, Michael Porter Jr. is 6'10" with a high arcing jump shot and, you know, and it's very hard to contest. But as a whole, he should still be pretty consistent, pretty reliable, because he's a very good shooter in and of himself. He took 7 threes a game last year for the Brooklyn Nets. So no real issues with that. And like I said, the other factor is opening up all that flexibility to do to pull off some other moves. Now, the funny thing is, in terms of their free agents, so they have the full MLE, but they haven't used it. They've used minimum contracts to sign free agents, and they signed Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. to round out the bench, right? Bruce Brown, he was on the Nuggets before. He was on that championship team, was a big part of it. Didn't do quite as much since then, right? The Pacers gave him that big contract, and, you know, he was okay, right? But not really a $20 million player. Then he was traded to Toronto. Didn't really do a whole lot there either. But now he goes back to Denver, where he fit in pretty seamlessly, right? As a guy who can defend multiple positions and offensively can do a number of things, right? Play a little bit with the ball, play without the ball. Most importantly, he can play off of Jokic very well, right? Because we saw him be able to do that. Very, really versatile player when he was in Denver. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., just another veteran guy who can come off the bench, fire up some threes, and get hot. Because we know that was a problem with the Nuggets the last few years, right? Where they've not really been a high volume 3-point shooting team. Not that they can't necessarily make threes, but they've not been a team that is like a modern offense. Now, again, Jokic is, an atypical superstar, but either way, if you look at their 3-point attempt rate last year, right, they were basically dead last, right? But you look at their 3-point percentage, they were fifth, right? But last in 3-point attempts. So, like I said, they can make threes at a decent clip, but kind of canceled out by not really attempting a lot. So you added a guy in Tim Hardaway Jr. who can take and make more threes, and then Cam Johnson can do 3-point shooting wise similar things to Michael Porter Jr. So that's helpful. And then they also were able to get off of Dario Saric's contract, and they were able to trade him for Jonas Valanciunas. Now the thing was, it seemed like he was trying to leave the team and go overseas, right? But, since then, seems like stuff is okay. I guess as okay as it could be for somebody who tried to leave the team, right? But, at the very least, if assuming he's going to be available and going to play, you have a decent option at the backup center, right? I mean, I know, he's kind of at a point now in his career where it's not the same player that he once was. And, even then, he's not like a perfect backup big. He's not like a great defender or anything like that. He's an okay passer, playmaker, but not, like not really. But just as a whole, it's better than what you had because they had really no backup center before. Or, it's DeAndre Jordan, but DeAndre Jordan past the point where he could really be a viable rotational piece. Because even the championship year, he really didn't play a whole lot in the playoffs, right? They just basically ran Aaron Gordon at center. But I guess the hope is that the guy that they drafted last year, Daron Holmes, right, where they were able to finagle and get him in the draft, that's clearly where he wanted to go. I think the hope is that whenever he's ready to come back from his Achilles, right, he should be okay, and then he should be able to contribute potentially right away, right? Because when we last saw him in the summer league, right, he was able to kind of showcase some skills as kind of a two-way stretch big, right, where he can space the floor, but then also move his feet and defend relatively well, right? Like if he hits, that's a solid pick, and that's the other question for Denver as well. Can those young guys continue to improve and potentially be some, continue to be more viable pieces? Like Christian Brown had a good year last year, right? I mean, he was moved into the full-time starting spot, had his best season. And then after that, the other guys on the bench, Peyton Watson, right? Regular season showed some, signs of growth, but didn't really help him a whole lot in the postseason. And then Julian Strother, just kind of seems like a potential microwave guy, but wasn't really much of a microwave for most of the season, right? He had the one game against Oklahoma City, game 6, but by and large, not really a guy that you could really trust. So that's the question is, can any of these other guys, one of those guys, Jalen Pickett, I mean, he played a little bit down the stretch of the season when Adelman was there, but the main thing is that now you still have one of the best starting fives in the league, combined with a couple of guys off the bench that on any given night could help you. So now they go from 5, 6 potential players that you could trust to now you could maybe move into 7, move into 8, which is really valuable, especially when you get into the postseason, right? Because obviously you're not playing 12 guys in the playoffs, but you can't have 5 guys in the postseason. You need more than that. So they did pretty much about as well as I think you could ask, for them, just because of the fact that we went into this offseason and we kind of said after they lost to Minnesota that if they were going to make any significant changes, you were going to have to trade Michael Porter Jr. And that was before we knew all about the CBA stuff. And now they did it. And now they have, like I said, more flexibility because they still have the MLE. So there's not really anybody in free agency where you're going to use it on at this point, unless, I don't know, somebody that we don't expect to get bought out gets bought out. But I don't know. It's probably not gonna be a player where it's the level of, yeah, let's give him 14 million or whatever, right? It's not gonna be that. So the thing is, you could still, I think, use it as a trade exception, and it just gives you more options and puts you in a better spot. So they were able to save money while also making their roster better. So that's pretty much an automatic A for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd have to go with an A as well. The flexibility is insane, and I don't think people really saw this coming. I know there were rumors of Michael Porter Jr. getting traded, but that was kind of the first domino to fall. And to be able to turn pretty much like almost $40 million in salary into like 21 with Cam Johnson is pretty phenomenal, right? And that's what really freed up a lot and allowed them to pull off this amazing offseason because their hands were tied, I thought, with the Michael Porter Jr. thing because you're pumping so much money into this team and then you're restricted. You can't really do anything but really get buyout guys. But now you're seeing that they put in a ton of quality into this roster for sure. They're deeper as well. And that's amazing, right? You look at the wins and you look at the losses, right? You lose Michael Porter Jr., you lose Dario Saric, Russell Westbrook, and DeAndre Jordan.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Not Dario.
yeah. Oh no, Dario Saric. Now we're gonna lose, 10 more games. But now you bring in Cam Johnson, Tim Hardaway Jr., Bruce Brown, and Valanciunas as well. So, solid. I think these are solid rotational guys. And then, like you said, Daron Holmes. That should be interesting, right? Because honestly, I know people talk about how much the team sucked when Jokic wasn't on the floor, but also when Aaron Gordon wasn't on the floor. At times, they look kind of rough as well. So maybe Daron Holmes can be the backup guy for a guy like Aaron Gordon and kind of replicate things that he's been able to do. So overall, I really like the construction of this roster, right? It's a complete retool, and I didn't think it was really possible, right? And that's what a lot of people thought. As long as Michael Porter Jr. was on the team, there was no way that they could significantly improve and get back to championship form. Lo and behold, here we are. Michael Porter Jr. is not on the team. I think Cam Johnson will be a fit upgrade for sure. Like you said, talent wise, I think Michael Porter Jr. is the better player. He's got, better physicals. He's, better numbers, all that stuff. But I think Cam Johnson's going to, do a lot defensively for this team that Michael Porter Jr. maybe couldn't have. I think he's going to be a little bit more consistent in terms of his role. We already know he's a spot up king. He can shoot from pretty much anywhere on the 3-point line. So overall, there's nothing that you can really hate on, I think, with this team in their offseason. So I'm expecting them to get back to championship form for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the main thing is that we knew that they had the talent. They just needed the depth. But, but in order to get the depth, you were still going to have to move on from one of your key guys. And you weren't trading Jokic. You weren't trading Jamal Murray. And you weren't trading Aaron Gordon. And then no one else on the roster other than Michael Porter Jr. really made the level of money to where you could actually realistically overhaul something. So, again, he played a pivotal role for them while he was there, helped them win a championship. But as we know, oftentimes in order to keep a championship team alive after a few seasons, you do have to have some change, especially in this decade, again, when we've seen a lot of teams, kind of have shorter windows, right, than we really expected,
Mhm.
right? We're not getting into them today, but, obviously when we get into Boston, it's like, wow, you look at the difference between what that team was before and what they are now, pretty stark. But just as a whole, that's kind of the reason to be excited about, this Nuggets team. Because again, they were able to push Oklahoma City to 7 games, even without the depth. And even with guys like Michael Porter Jr. not really playing well in that series with the shoulder, or Aaron Gordon in Game 7 not really being able to give you what you would like to have from him because of the hamstring. But, it's just the question of, well, the rest of the Western Conference got better, but Denver got better along with it and was already one of the best teams. So that's a good spot to be in if you're the Denver Nuggets. So if for Daron Holmes, so do you feel like he can play both either, the 4 and the 5, or does he feel like strictly one or the other?
I think you could play both. I think it's going to be dependent on the rotation for sure. I would like to see him more as a 4 because I think that kind of fits, his mold a little bit more. But as a 5, I think he could be serviceable for sure. I just need to really, see him on an NBA court, right? I mean, like college wise, very versatile, but the NBA is very different than the NCAA.
You're right. Yeah, and who knows? There could be a point where maybe he supplants Valanciunas as the backup big. And then I guess the other question is the young guys that are already on the roster, right? Which guy are you kind of looking at to hopefully take the next step, the quote unquote big leap, to being a really helpful piece for them? Because again, like they have some intriguing young guys, but a lot of them really have just outside of Christian Brown have kind of just been that, just kind of ideas and on, and then when they actually play, you haven't seen a whole lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, like you already said it, Christian Brown is kind of bona fide. I think, we know what he is and we know also what he could be as well. So, I don't think he's in that conversation, but I'm going to have to go with my my guy. This is a guy I was very high on last year. Didn't really do a whole lot, down the stretch, but Peyton Watson, I think, ultimately, he's got the frame to be an elite defender, and he is at times, but I think the boneheadedness on offense and defensively gambling a little bit too much. I think that kind of hurts him. But if he can develop into a more solid role player, then I think, that could be a key piece for them, getting back to championship form.
Yeah, exactly. And the main thing for him is the shooting, right? Because I mean, yeah, like because he's never really going to be like a high level decision maker more than
Mm-hmm.
likely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, aside from maybe the level of read and react, attack a closeout, drive and kick, maybe, but by and large, offensively, you're asking him either to hit his open threes or, cut backdoor, right? Or clean up duty, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. You're not asking him to do much more than that. And the main thing is if the jump shooting can be real and actually be good, right? Then that's going to allow him more playing time because it's just hard to play, as we've seen with a lot of teams. It's just hard to play a bunch of guys in the playoffs that don't really
Yeah.
offer you a lot of 3-point shooting, right? Like they had to do that with Russ, where, even though he provided a lot of value with the playmaking, the rebounding energy, and the transition play. It got to a point where Oklahoma City was leaving him open and he couldn't knock him down. Now I know he had the hand fracture injury or whatever, so that would be part of it. But even prior to that, it's not like he's a great 3-point shooter. So that's the type of stuff that's going to happen where he's a completely different player if he can knock those down,
And
right? And we'll see if he's able to do it because like in the regular season, I mean, it's just wild because last season he shot 35% from three,
yeah, he's
which
fine
is
in the
way
regular season. In the
yeah,
postseason, he
yeah,
sucked.
average. He's gotten better in the regular season from three each year as his minutes have gone up. And then honestly, in the playoffs, he shot 37% from three. But again, so much of that play was so up and down because then there'd be some games where you don't even notice he was out there. Whereas, and then there's other games where you're like, oh wow, here's a little bit of Peyton Watson. So and he's so versatile as a shot blocking wing size guy where, just being able to play that type of help defense could really help out Denver, right? Because we know it last year in the regular season, they were not very good on the defensive end. And then in the playoffs, it looked a lot better. And they were really able to flummox Oklahoma City with their zone defense. So I guess the question now is so over under is 53.5. Question is over under, and where do we see them in the Western Conference next season?
Yeah. That's a tough one. Uh and you said the over under is 53 and a half.
53.5.
Oh boy. Um
FanDuel Sportsbook.
yeah. Cuz what? They went 50 and 32 last year, so they were pretty much
Yeah.
tied with both LA teams. I think they go over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go over, not by much, I don't think they're a 60 win team, but I think they got 55 in them. I think that's possible, right? Like they're going to be potentially healthier, deeper as well in a stronger Western Conference, but I think they're at the top end. So that shouldn't really affect them to the point where it makes them, under 53 wins. I don't think so.
Yeah, I think the year they won the title, right? They won a little over 50 games, right? So I mean, I think they were somewhere along in the realm of I think yeah, because that was our first year we did the podcast. They went 53 and 29. Then the following season, right? They when they lost to Minnesota, they went 57 and 25. So, but like you said, now this the Western Conference is a lot stronger. And that is kind of the part where it's like, okay, then that means they're going to have to get, like you said, closer to 60 wins. Now, Jokic, when he's healthy, assuming he's healthy, right, should be able to get him somewhere around 50 wins in and of himself. Then you have a little bit more depth, so maybe you don't completely fall off the map in a random regular season game when he's out. So I think they could definitely get to like 54, 55, somewhere along the lines of where they were a couple seasons ago. So I'll say over as well. Like you said, a slight over. But, then I guess then the second question is, what do we think is the outcome for this team? Did have they done enough to where you can see a world where they can take out Oklahoma City?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I like the depth, right? And look at the series that we just got to witness, right? They took them to 7 games, albeit they didn't come out on top. But I think with the culmination of talent that they brought in, better fits, all that stuff, you're going to potentially get some healthier guys, young guys potentially stepping up as well. I think they're probably the biggest threat to Oklahoma City once again. So,
Yeah.
and they have the title experience, so it's not like they haven't been in this situation before.
Yeah. I think what I would say is that if Oklahoma City doesn't come out of the West, I think Denver would be the next most likely, just because like you said, they're already proven. Because with some of these other teams, right, like, well, obviously we'll talk about Houston later, like we loved everything they did, but there's still things that we have to see in order for them to hit the check mark of like, oh yeah, they're going to be able to come out of the Western Conference. Denver already has proven that. And they're not really relying on older talent, right? It's mostly guys that are either in their primes, for their core starter guys, or guys that are, kind of at the point where it's like, hey, it would be nice if they'd be better, right? But they're not really all over the map, right? They have a pretty good balance of a lot of different types of players. So I think I'm not ready to say that they're gonna win the West, but I think that they have a much higher likelihood. I think you can feel much more confident about Denver's chances just because, like you said, it seems like matchup wise they match up well. Now it's just with Oklahoma City, even though they didn't add anybody aside from Thomas Sorber. I think everyone expects them to be better because they have young guys that you expect to continue to improve. And that's where it may be tough for Denver, where those guys could just get to a level where, okay, we can play as well as we could or can, but it just may not matter. And that's the part that you kind of worry about. But it does feel like matchup wise, because we've seen a lot of this is about matchups. I think they do possess a lot of problems for Oklahoma City,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I think like history is not on OKC's side in terms of going back to back because we haven't seen a team do that this entire decade. So if it's not Oklahoma City, it's probably Denver. And I think, there's reasons to feel confident about that one. But again, some of these other teams still do have a shot as well. Because like we said, out after Oklahoma City, everybody's, ranges from really good to pretty good, to good, where it's like I could see this, a lot of different teams making the conference finals. But I'd still have Oklahoma City as the favorite. Do you have a favorite signing? I'd like to say, well, I mean, I guess they haven't signed a bajillion free agents, but taking Cam Johnson out of the mix, which one do you like better between Bruce Brown, Valanciunas, and Tim Hardaway? And I know that Valanciunas was a trade candidate as well, but I feel like Cam Johnson's kind of like the obvious, this is
Yeah.
my favorite one.
I mean, I think Bruce Brown, because he's going to allow them to replicate what kind of got them to the NBA Finals, right? He's going to be able to play some small ball five. He's going to be an elite backdoor cutter. He's also going to be able to hit jump shots and also be a great perimeter defender as well. So, a mini point center, which I think is something that this team lacked. They tried to replicate that, I think, with Westbrook at times, but obviously two very different players, at very different time periods. So I would say Bruce Brown, welcoming him back is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think of the Valanciunas move?
I like.
Since I know he was on your team, last year for a stretch, right? The Wizards, you were able to get off that contract, So what did you see from him last year as a Wizards fan?
Um, uh, I'll start with the negatives. I didn't see a whole lot of floor spacing. I think that was something that I thought, the Wizards brought him in there to do. But then I was like, well, realistically, they probably brought him in there just to trade him, right? So, um,
Right.
my expectations were very lowered once I came to the salty realization that yeah, he's not going to be here for very long. Um, but the positives, I will say, physical, screen setting big, can rebound for sure. I would like to see him get better, in terms of the playmaking. Like you said, there's times when, you don't need to, go up with the offensive rebound. There's times when you can easily kick it out. But at the end of the day, very physical screen setting big, which I think Denver can use, especially, if the modern NBA is going to be, double big. So I think he's going to be a good complement.
So can you see him and Jokic playing together?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see it happening. Maybe we get some 4 or 5 pick and roll. I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Denver goes that odd route, but I think the question is going to be like, what would a lineup consisting of those two guys even look like, right?
Yeah. At the very least, Jokic can shoot. So, like
Exactly.
he's clearly a reliable, outside shooter.
Yeah,
So,
but no, Valanciunas is a good rebounder. He's a good, physical screen setting big, which is good. Every team needs that.
yeah. So overall, high on Denver. Still would probably lean Oklahoma City, but it's a lot closer now than it was before. But again, with the potential for Oklahoma City, if they soar, it may be all for naught. But I think Denver did a much better job of positioning themselves. Because again, you never know. Because Oklahoma City, again, the other part of the back-to-back issue is the injuries, right? So somebody on Oklahoma City, I know they dealt with some injuries last year, and hopefully it doesn't happen, right? But say SGA or someone else has to miss significant time, right? Then Denver will be right there, and that's why you do a lot of what you want to do is position yourself to give yourself the best chance to win. So I think they did that.
Yeah.
Then moving on, we're going to move over to the Eastern Conference, right? Team with a little bit different of a story last year, and that's the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? And, their seasons kind of were almost opposites of each other in some way, shape, or form, right? Because with the Nuggets, you weren't very high on them going into the season. And then, obviously, I don't think we didn't expect Denver to do what they did in the summer, but you at least felt like, all right, this team is clearly much better than we thought, right? Because they were able to take the champs to 7 games. Cleveland is a different story because I think we were high on Cleveland going into the season. They were even better than we thought. They finished with the second best record in the league, 64-18. For a while, they had the best record. And then it all came crashing down in the playoffs, right? When they ended up losing to the Indiana Pacers in 5. Now they did have injuries, right? Darius Garland, was missed the first couple of games and then was hobbled for most of that series anyways with a foot issue. Now he's had surgery, so he's going to be out to begin the season. Evan Mobley, I think, missed a game with an ankle injury, and then Mitchell, right, was hobbled by the end of that series. So I mean, injuries happen, but all in all, I think you were very disappointed with how the Cavs season ended, right? And it's a shame because for the regular season, they were amazing, right? On the offensive end, right? They hired Kenny Atkinson. They were the number one offense over the course of the year while still being a top 10 defense. But then in the second half of the season, they were a little bit more up and down, right? And we're trying to figure out, is this just kind of regular season just woes? Is it something to be worried and concerned about? And yeah, it kind of was, right? Because the defense didn't look the same in the playoffs. Again, injuries notwithstanding. And it just a lot of the questions that you kind of had were the same questions that ended up occurring in the playoffs, right? Where it's like you watch the two bigs, and it's kind of weird. And then obviously, like I said, Garland was hobbled, and without his offense, they really sputtered. They desperately needed him, and they couldn't really get a whole lot out of that. And then there were questions, of course, after the playoffs about, well, shoot, are they going to break this team up because they're in the second apron? There's not a whole lot they can do, and I think they did pretty much what they should have done, and they ran it back, right? Because especially now, given what happened with the East with Indiana and the Celtics, right? Because we didn't know that going into the playoffs with the Tatum and Halliburton injuries. The Eastern Conference is going to be a lot different, right? Because the Celtics and the Pacers don't really have much of a chance to come out of the East next year. And so now, if you're the Cavs, you're poised for to be in one of the best spots. Once again, offseason wise, the main thing that they did was they traded Isaac Okoro for Lonzo Ball, right? Who was the backup point guard, starting point guard for the Bulls, right? And it's kind of been a wild ride for him, right? Where in Chicago the last few years he's been hurt, right? He's had the knee issue where he wasn't able to play at all. He came back last year, and looked kind of rusty, right? I think his first game back he looked okay, but the jump shot wasn't there. The defense wasn't quite the same. And again, he hadn't played in like 3 years. So it was understandable that he wasn't going to look the same. It's just the question is, can he get back to anything close to what he was before he got hurt? Because before he got hurt, right, he had pretty much his best year in the league, right? Where he gave him 13, 5, and 5, 2 steals a game, a block a game, figured out his 3-point shot where he shot over 40% on 7 attempts a game, and was able to be above, and was able to be a more efficient and effective offensive player, right? Because that was always kind of the issue for him when you watched him play. It's like he can defend, he can pass, he can rebound and do all these things, but his shot wasn't really there. But for Cleveland, obviously they lost Jerome, who was a big part of their regular season rotation. I mean, there were a lot of games where he was kind of one of their leading scorers, right? I mean, he was
Yeah.
great last year, right? To the level where you're like, what the heck is this? Is this real? And then in the playoffs, yeah, that didn't really work out. In the Heat series, he was good. But the Heat was a different caliber of team from the Pacers, right? And then in the Pacers series, kind of all fell apart. Not all his fault, right? Because again, you were missing contributions from a number of key guys, but just as a whole, it's going to be different because they're two completely different players, right? Because Lonzo's not really a scorer; he does a lot of the other stuff, and the scoring is actually kind of the issue for him. And that's the question: is I don't know what I'm going to get from him, and I don't know how many games he'll play.
Mm.
If he's relatively healthy and he can be better than he was, last year, he could be helpful because again, that gives you a guard that you can put out there that's got size, that's got passing and versatility and defense. So you can run him with either guard, and maybe use him to take on the tougher perimeter assignments. Which so on paper, if he pans out, he could be good for them. And with Okoro, it's wild because he wasn't bad for them in the regular season. He shot the 3 ball well, defended well. Just in the playoffs, just another guy that gets left open and doesn't give you a whole lot on the offensive end. Kind of a weird trade, not really one I would have expected. But, if he works, he could be good for them. I just don't know what to expect in terms of him health-wise and production-wise. But on paper, I could see it being decent. And then aside from that, they brought in Larry Nance Jr., right? Who used to play for Cleveland for a little bit. And, again, now he's flashed a 3-point shot. He's 33 and he's had a ton of injuries. So he's another guy where if he plays and he's healthy, he could be helpful for them as another backup big, but kind of like an athletic small ball, switchable type big that could play with either guy. So that could be helpful, right? Maybe be a Georges Niang replacement, but they're still very different players. And then after that, right, not really much else that they did because again, they were a second apron. They're a second apron team, and so you're just kind of banking on other stuff. I think they re-signed Sam Merrill, so he's back on the team, and he again was another helpful regular season guy, 3-point shooter, can play off of either guard. But you're really just continuing to bank on hopefully they're healthy again because in the regular season they were healthy. They managed their minutes. Nobody really played the significant amount of minutes last year, even Mitchell, right? All those guys were somewhere around 30 minutes a game or less, but then they still got hurt in the playoffs. But I think their offseason was fine. Again, I wasn't really expecting anything significant just because of the fact of where they are financially, and I just didn't think they needed to do anything significant. They basically ran it back, brought back, most of their guys, and then swapped out a few. And, if those guys pan out, they could be helpful. I just don't know how helpful they'll be. So I'd say their offseason would be a B for me.
Okay. Yeah, I would tend to agree. I would give them a B plus for sure. I think one of the things that I'm kind of factoring into this is the fact that they're a second apron team, so their hands were pretty much tied from the jump to begin with. I think the introduction of Lonzo Ball to this team is pretty good. It's cost effective, right? Like it's not like you had to
Yeah.
spend a ton of money to grab the guy. And you move on from Isaac Okoro, who was a guy I think that never really found, I think, his footing on this team. Kind of did last year, right, defensively, but I think offensively never really. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that was really the goal with a guy like that, when you draft him that high.
Mhm.
Granted, different era, but yeah, I think he kind of overstayed his welcome. So I think bringing in a guy like Lonzo Ball to replicate what Jerome, brought to you I guess, with the playmaking and stuff, that will help. But yeah, Cleveland is a tough team to grade because they were so good during the regular season. They had a very, very bad blemish, I think, on their postseason. But like you said, very injury riddled, and I think the best case scenario for them was to run it back. There's no point in really blowing it up just because you are in that second apron, and you kind of just have to do moves along the margin. And I think the only other move they did was bring back Larry Nance Jr. So that's what your third big off the bench or whatever. So I don't really have an issue with anything that they did.
Right.
I commend them for even being able to make moves along the margins like this, because we all knew Ty Jerome was gone. It was always going to be a matter of, well, what are you going to do to replicate that, or bring in new guys. So I don't have a problem with Lonzo or Larry Nance Jr.
Yeah, it's just a matter of will those guys actually play. They're both injury risks just because they haven't played a whole lot of basketball in the last few seasons. But if they're healthy and they pan out, they could be helpful. But the strength of the team is primarily going to be based off its starting five. But the thing last year was because they had more depth, that's part of what made them better, because you could bring a Sam Merrill off the bench or Ty Jerome or, DeAndre Hunter or somebody like that. But the most of the team is still intact.
Yep.
And I'm going to assume they're going to continue to roll with the same starting five, right? Where it's the four guys plus Max Strus. I'm going to assume that's what they're going to do. And then after that, Hunter off the bench, and then Merrill off the bench, Lonzo, Larry Nance Jr., and then whomever, Dean Wade, any of the other guys that they want to play. I mean, it's again, like we said, how do you separate the regular season from the playoffs? Like, we know this is still a good team. We know this is still going to be one of the best teams in the league. It's just a matter of, can you trust them? How much do you buy that they are going to be able to do better in the playoffs than they did last year? I don't know. I mean, if they're healthy, there's no reason why they shouldn't get to the conference finals, but we know that the Eastern Conference is going to be weird. It's going to be freaky. There's going to be something that's going to happen. On paper, this should be considered the favorites to come out of the East, right? I think you and I are a little bit higher on the Knicks. So I think, that's where it might be a little bit different, from some people. But the over-under is 55.5. Should be over because, I mean, unless they have more injuries, which could happen, they should be somewhere around what they were last year. Maybe they don't win 64 games, but they could still win 60. They could still win 58. And, the thing is, the Eastern Conference, there's, I guess, a few more good teams, but then it's like, now there's a few other teams you should be able to beat. Like, you should be able to beat Boston more than you did in the regular season. Maybe you should be able to best Indiana more than you did in the regular season, right? So, and then the bottom of the East should be able to beat Brooklyn. You should be able to beat Washington. So, it's just the Western Conference is tougher because, I mean, Cleveland was great against the Western Conference. I mean, they didn't lose too many teams. They didn't lose too much to teams in the West. I mean, I think they lost to Oklahoma City in one of those games, but outside of that, they were really good. I mean, they were great in both conferences. Just, the Western Conference, they did, very well. So I guess it's just, what do you over under on Cleveland?
Over. No question about it. It wouldn't
Mhm.
surprise me if they have a better regular season record than last year. I know that might be a big, ask for them, but it wouldn't surprise me because, like you said, the East is weak, so they should dominate if they're fully healthy.
Yeah, and then I guess the question is, then what's our expectation for this Cavs team? Can we trust that they can get to the conference finals or further?
On
Do we
paper,
think they
on
can do it?
paper, on paper, they should be a team that makes it to the conference finals at least. If they don't get there, then that's a disappointment. Once again, you're in the second apron, paying these guys a lot of money. You have a promising young core. You have a leader in Donovan Mitchell. It's just a matter of getting over the hump. I don't know if they can do it, but they should be able to do it.
Yeah, so yeah, I think I'm gonna pencil the well, I don't want to pencil anybody in necessarily, but I like you said, they should get to the conference finals worst case scenario. Because there are teams that have improved, but I think Cleveland's core should be better. And it's more, I guess, proven, right? In a way. But again, the NBA is funny. Things can happen. Something in the Eastern Conference will go wrong for somebody, as it does for for several teams over the course of the season. But I would expect Cleveland to be not much different than last year, regular season wise. It's just a matter of playoffs. I mean, Ty Jerome didn't really give him a whole lot in the playoffs, so is Lonzo going to do much different? I mean, maybe defensively, but offensively, I'm not so sure. But if Garland is healthy, I think that's kind of the main thing. If he can be healthy and impactful for the Cavs, then they should be able to get much further than they were last year, right? Again, if you get to the finals, you have a chance to win it all. Like I think the West teams will some of them will be favored. Like if it's OKC, they'll be favored over Cleveland. But I think Cleveland outside of Oklahoma City could match a lot of the other teams out in the Western Conference. So if they don't face OKC, they have a decent shot at being able to win it all. I just just can they do it this time around? I think if Garland is healthy and good, right? Like if he's actually good and he doesn't have a bad postseason or series, then they should be fine, right? They should, like I said, at least conference finals. It's just a matter of will that happen? Because it's not easy to just stay healthy over the course of an entire season.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but either way, like I said, I don't have an issue with any of the moves they made. We knew they weren't going to do drastic things, or we hoped that they weren't going to do drastic things. And I think the Lonzo move was more surprising than any of the other stuff that they did, just because you didn't even know what they were going to do. And like you said, the Okoro thing is a disappointment because, I mentioned he came off the bench, and like you said, that's not really what you would have wanted. I mean, because he was the 5th pick overall in the 2020 draft. And, again, the numbers aren't horrific, but they're not good enough to the point where you feel good about picking him. And it's one of those situations where you sold low on a top 5 draft pick, right? Because if you told me a year ago, right before the trade deadline, like they're going to trade Isaac Okoro for Lonzo Ball, that'd kind of be viewed as a disappointment considering where Lonzo was in terms of his injuries, right? So that's the part where it sucks because on paper, right, he's seems like a decent complement to those guys, right? He's a little undersized at 6'5", but just if the shot and if the shot is there along with the defense, he should be solid. But it just seemed like it didn't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully he does well in Chicago. But that's the only thing is that, like we talked about, the wing depth is stronger than it was going into last year because they didn't have DeAndre Hunter going into last
Very
year.
true.
But they don't have a lot of natural 3-and-D wings. Do you expect anything from maybe one of their draft picks? Because that could be something that could maybe help. Maybe it doesn't change a whole lot, but at the very least, it could make them a little bit deeper and just give them extra guys. And Jalen Tyson from a year ago, Craig Porter Jr. right from like a year or so ago, and then the guy they drafted, Proctor out of Duke. Any of those guys you think could potentially help them out, at least regular season, worst case scenario?
I mean, Craig Porter Jr. actually helped them out at times during the regular season, so I would expect him to continue to do so. I think Tyrese Proctor will as well, right? I think he's going to give them good minutes defensively, especially at that guard position. If he can find a way into the rotation. Tyson, I'm not as high on. I haven't seen enough from him. I think I need to see more, but as of right now, those are the two guys that I would say will most likely help them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So overall, we liked what the Cavs did, this season, or this offseason. It's just a matter of will they be able to overcome some of these playoff woes that they had. What do you think about what are your expectations for? Because we should probably talk about those guys, the actual core pieces. What are your expectations for those guys going forward? Because it seems like for the most part, Allen is what he is, right? He's a guy that's a good player, helped him a lot in the regular season, played pretty much every game. Didn't help him quite as much in the playoffs against Indiana. It seems like he's got some limitations, but a solid, good center. And then after that, right, Mitchell, another strong season, strong postseason until he got hurt. But you don't really have too many questions about Mitchell, right? It's more so the continued questions of the progression of Garland and Mobley. Now Garland's 26, so age-wise he should be getting ready to enter his prime. It's just, he was hurt. And then Mobley's obviously the other guy, fresh off a defensive player of the year, all NBA as well, right? I'm assuming we're also expecting a continued leap from him, mainly on the offensive end, continuing to, improve as a jump shooter, continue to improve as a decision maker, ball handler, playmaker, continue to improve in terms of physicality. and all that. But what are you expecting to see, hopefully, from Garland and Mobley?
Yeah, I have very lofty expectations, and that's just the
Mhm.
reality. Look at where they were picked, right? And I'm a huge Darius Garland fan. Like, that's one of my favorite players in the league right now. But we have
Right.
to be real. These guys can't stay healthy, specifically Garland, right? And you need them in the postseason. You need them to be 100% or, relatively close to that, right? So that's my concern is what does this team look like in the postseason? I'm concerned with the injuries because we've seen it over and over and over, right? When you
Mhm.
have significant injuries and you miss time like that, you can't just drop in, to the playoffs and expect to, play like you were just playing in the regular season. No, that's not how it works. You need to ramp up. So my thing is, if healthy, conference
Mhm.
finals. If not, I don't know. And I think the reason that they don't make the conference finals would be to health concerns from either Garland or Mobley. Whoever it is, these guys can't miss the time that they missed last year, especially in the postseason. It can't. They
Yeah.
can't. It
Would
can't work
you?
like that.
Yeah. What if it's another? I guess then the question after that is, say it's another. Excuse me. Say it's another disappointing season. What do you do if you're Cleveland? Do you still run it back?
I'd move on from one of the guys, and it would probably have to be Garland because I'm going to assume that that's going to be the guy that is going to get hurt just because it seems like he's the more injury prone. It's always some weird, injury with him. Like, I think what last year was the toe. Before that, it was the jaw, right? So,
Right.
I mean, it kind of keeps piling up. And I think if he was more durable, oh man, yeah. I mean, this team would be amazing in the postseason.
Hmm. Yeah. So, hopefully that's the case, and hopefully we get to see, the best version of this team, whatever it is. Because, in the regular season before, all that playoff stuff happened, right? I think everybody was really high on Cleveland and thought, like, all right, maybe you're not picking them to beat Boston, but they had a real shot. And then as it turns out, neither team made it out of
Wild,
the East.
very
Because
wild.
those were the two teams I think everybody had pegged outside of you, I guess, to come out of the East. So, we'll see what happens with them. But I expect them to continue to be good. I don't really expect to drop off. And I think again, considering they have young guys on the roster, like you said, that's the argument for maybe they could be better. I don't know if they're going to be better than 64 wins, but maybe a more formidable postseason team. But just I do have concerns about you don't have a lot of physical guys because it does seem like Indiana was able to outmuscle them from a physical standpoint, and they didn't really. I don't feel like they really addressed that with the additions they made. I mean, I guess maybe you feel like Ball and Larry Nance Jr. are more physical players potentially than what they had. I maybe,
Yeah,
but still, what do
yeah,
you think?
yeah. I mean, it's going to be dependent on who they play and who they come up against. But like I said, I don't really have any glaring issues outside of potentially health,
Mhm.
with this team and even the new additions as well, because I think Lonzo Ball, he brings, a defensive side that they don't
Mhm.
really have alongside Tyrese Proctor as well. So that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
And then Larry Nance Jr., undersized, but very athletic. So we know that he can kind of potentially replicate some of the things that Jared Allen, can do as well, in terms of, being a lob threat and stuff like that. So, I'm 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 high on this team. I'll
Mhm.
just keep it at that. But I think we do have to temper our expectations and look at, the past and say, well,
Mhm.
the reason this team hasn't gone very far is either because of injuries or significant flameouts from guys who should be elevating in the playoffs.
Who's Cleveland's biggest threat in the East?
This year, probably New York. Um it's not going to be Boston. It's not going to be you know, if fully healthy, I would say Philly as well. I would say Philly and New York would probably be the two biggest threats. And I know that might be surprising coming from a Philly hater, but if Philly's fully healthy, I think they're scary.
Yeah, it's just hard to bank on the Philly thing.
Exactly.
Uh, so that's kind of the
Right.
issue there. I mean, I don't. Unfortunately for Embiid, it seems like he's still not able to be on the floor and practice basketball. So if
Nope.
that's the case, it's kind of hard to really bank on them to really do a whole lot. Even though, like you said, they do have talent, but we'll get to them when we get to them because they still have stuff that they have to sort out. Any other Cleveland things that you want to say?
Um, no, not really. Other than the fact that I'm high on the team. They had a solid draft. And yeah, I mean, they just gotta prove it because I think on paper, like you said, we already know that they're the best team in the East right now. But they need to show us in the postseason because that's what really matters.
Yeah. All right, so I guess moving on, to other stories around the league, right? I know we hadn't been able to mention it because it's been a while since we last recorded, but Men's Health magazine, Luka Doncic, right on the cover, right? He was doing a Jordan tour in New York, right, showing off, his new conditioning and body that he's been working on in the summer. And hey, this is something that we talked about where this was expected, I think, for the most part, where you kind of knew once all this stuff came out. And, there was an article about this would have probably happened anyways, just because he changed his training staff and whatnot. But this is kind of if you're high on either Luka or the Lakers or whatever, this is what you would be hoping to see where, he's seems like he's in better shape. And then as long as he stays healthy, right? Because of course, we've seen many guys get into better shape over the summer, and then unfortunately something happens in terms of injury, and then it gets derailed. But as long as he's healthy, I think you should be pretty high on what you're going to see from Luka next year.
I agree, but with that being said, I think in the same breath, I think Stephen A said it best. Let's read the quote. He said there's a difference between getting in shape in the offseason and staying in shape during the season. And I think he's right in terms of that because relatively speaking, Luka's kind of comes into the season looking okay, but I think it's as time goes on, you can see the conditioning might not be, the best, but we'll kind of have to wait and see. But
Yeah.
regardless, if he's like, in peak physical condition, might be the scariest player in the league.
Right, that's like I said, if you're the Lakers, what you're hoping to see, because we know that the roster isn't perfect. We know it's flawed. We know that nobody's probably picking them to win the Western Conference. But a lot of it is going to start with what version of Luka are you going to get? Are you going to get something similar to what we saw the year they went to the finals, right? Where he's healthy by and large, and like you said, looks like a top 3 player in the league. Or are you going to get one where he's a little bit more banged up and not quite able to be at his best, and then your team is going to probably be a little bit worse because your best player's a worse version of himself. So I think there's reasons to be super high on it. Just like you said, hopefully he can stay healthy, because if there's an injury, that's where you're probably going to get a little bit of a drop off.
And the weight
But
gain.
yeah, exactly. So, but either way, this is something that I think we were both high on. Like we knew and hoped that something like this would happen. It's just a matter of, is it going to be sustainable? I think it will be as long as he's healthy.
Yep.
And if you get, and like you said, if you get that, that's going to create a much better version of LA, right? Who also has other stuff to deal with, right? Because they still have to figure out, what they're going to do with the rest of their roster. And we'll talk more about the Lakers, I guess, once we get into their offseason. But either way, you should be pretty optimistic about that. And I think this weekend or so, the next few days, he's expected to sign that extension. And then when that happens, right, then that'll calm down and quiet the talks about, could he leave, after next season if something doesn't happen, right? It seems like that both sides are pretty committed to one another, right? I mean, they brought in players that he was recruiting. It's just a matter of, how far can he take him? How far, and assuming LeBron stays there, which I think he will, right? How far can those guys, get them? Again, nobody's going to pick them to win the West, but if you have the best version of Luka, whatever that is, right, which we know can be, like you said, in the discussion for best player in the game, right? You have a shot.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. So, moving on, I I guess there's gonna be a league, a potential international league that's gonna be made, right? So there was talk about Adam Silver going to Real Madrid, right, and discussing some stuff. There was also the pictures about LeBron and Maverick Carter and Jokic's agent, and they were meeting about a new international basketball league. It sounds like a lot of people think that some of the expansion team talks have kind of quieted down somewhat, where it seems like some of the team governors don't want to necessarily do that. I guess for financial reasons, I guess they'd have to split more and then not quite get it quite as much back. But it seems like for, Silver, they want to make some type of new international basketball league. I'd be curious to see, what that's like and what it's going to look like, because, it's a little bit different, but I know in the WNBA they have that unrivaled league where that's handled by the players. The WNBA doesn't really do anything with that, but it'd be something interesting to see, and I'd be curious as to how popular it would be, right? So Shams kind of said the league would probably consist of 6 men's teams, 6 women's teams, and they would play games around the world, and it would basically serve as a rival to the NBA, and it's gotten funding from a bunch of different groups. And they would play like one city for a week or a weekend and then move to another week, kind of like the golf league, right? The what is it, LIV golf? Or I guess Formula One does that as well, right? The
Mm-hmm.
racing
Mm-hmm.
league. So, what do we think of this?
I mean, it could be cool. I mean, like I would love to see, you know, a pro-am esque kind of setup for that contains NBA players. Like sometimes we see it in summer runs, with like the crossover league or stuff like that. But like I want like something real, something, televised nationally, with some marquee players. I think that would be amazing. And competition never hurt anybody, right? It just needs to be done correctly, right? Like you don't want something that's just going to flame out. And who knows? There's always potential for mergers down the line, absorption, and that can obviously force the hand to create, some of these expansion teams or whatever the case may be, or add, more, G League teams, whatever you want to do. There's the possibilities are endless as long as there is healthy competition. Like we've seen it with the NFL, the UFL, XFL, whatever the case may be. So it's been done before.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to see. And then I would also be curious to see, like I said, what the interest level from fans would be, right? Because you know, because we haven't really had something like that before. The closest I guess would be the big three, I guess, right? But that's a little bit different. And like you said, you mentioned the pro-am leagues, but that's also different because that doesn't have the same viewership infrastructure. They've had like a couple of the games on TV, but by and large, usually you just see clips on the internet, or
Yep.
I guess you can watch some of it on YouTube, or I guess you can go to those games as well because it's not like they cost anything. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious. But moving on, then after that, more Kaminga news, I guess. So, it's kind of funny. This is really the main one that we're hearing a lot about. Like, I don't think we've really heard much about any of the other ones aside from like, oh yeah, both sides are not, keen on whatever the offers are. Like, even like Cam Thomas or Giddy, or heard like literally nothing on Quentin Grimes, but the Kaminga one we keep hearing a ton about. And basically, Golden State offered 2-year, $45 million deal, with a waived no trade clause, right? And basically, like Kaminga, I think he wants the money, but I think he also doesn't want to come back to Golden State. And let's say like if Kaminga waives his no trade clause, I guess in theory that means that Golden State could just trade him wherever they wanted to, or not trade him at all. There were reports about, I guess, some deals that could have occurred, right? Like the Suns had a deal of, I think it was like Royce O'Neal and Nick Richards and 4 second-round picks, and then with the Kings, it's that goofy Devin Carter, Dario Saric thing. But also the Kings, maybe they move Malik Monk, but I haven't heard about Monk to Golden State. But I guess Golden State could potentially grab him if they're willing to give up whatever. But I, again, this is all over the place, so it's hard to say what's going to happen. I mean, it almost sounded like the reporting was that they think that Kaminga will just come back, right? Just a matter of what he signs. But what do you think? Because this is all like this is a lot to
Yeah.
just kind of put out there.
Yeah, I don't know. This seems like a
Never ends.
yeah,
Never ending.
this is a never-ending stalemate, and I don't know what the resolution is going to be. I would prefer that he's gone and we just move on from that saga, because if he comes back, we already know that, the relationship is soured, right? Like it's not going to be good for either party, and it wouldn't surprise me if, by the end of the season, like he's just not playing straight up. So, I think they need to find a way to get rid of him and just call it a day.
Yeah, Sam Amick said that the trade offer for Kaminga was Malik Monk and a 2030 first round pick, lottery protected. So my guess is Golden State probably would prefer that to be unprotected. But I guess the question is like, if you're Golden State, would you do either of those deals?
Yeah, I don't know. Um Yeah, I mean, I understand their hesitancy because they do want to get a solid return that legitimately gives them a solid upgrade going into the season, because you don't want to waste, Steph and Jimmy year. So I get it, but I mean, these offers are kind of pitiful, if you want me to be honest. So I understand why they're reluctant to do anything.
Yeah. You wouldn't like Malik Monk in Golden State?
Mm, I mean, kinda, but like you said, I would want that pick to be unprotected. Like I want the lottery pick to
Yeah,
be unprotected. Yeah,
yeah, but
exactly. But Sacramento's not going to budge on that. So that's where I'm like, it comes down to an endless stalemate.
yeah, I guess like because that's the thing is that like I think for Golden State, I can understand not wanting to trade Kuminga for like a mediocre return. Like a lot of people have mentioned like they like the Suns deal in terms of like yeah they would do the Royce O'Neal Nick Richards deal because it's like yeah those guys aren't great, but I guess it's a 3-and-D wing that fits and then a backup center which they don't really I guess have that you really trust, but I can understand Golden State not wanting to do that, and I definitely understand the Devin Carter, Dario Saric one. If you could get Monk somehow in a Kuminga deal, like I think I'd be interested in that. But I also understand like the thought process of like, do we really want to add another small guard,
Yeah.
to a team that's already not very big? But I guess you're kind of thinking like, well, we need some type of offensive juice because outside of Steph and Jimmy, you don't really have anybody else that you can really say like, oh, I can bank on you getting like 15,
Yeah.
or
Exactly.
more in a night, right? And that's kind of what Malik Monk can do. But it's odd because, I mean, I guess the Kings now are no longer that high on Malik Monk, right? Now, I mean, I don't know what happened there. I don't know if it's that they just feel like, well, we have Levine, we have DeRozan, so we don't need Monk. I don't know. But who knows what's going to happen? Because, I mean, we've heard a ton about Malik Monk trade rumors with a bunch of other teams. For a while, we thought he might be going to Detroit in the sign and trade with Dennis Schroeder, and that ended up not happening. So what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you said, probably just a little bit of oversaturation in terms of the same thing, shot creating. Like, do we really need another microwave, right? And it's like, yeah, he's a great player and he brings, tenacity on the offensive end, but you already got that in your stars. So I can understand why they're trying to shop him for sure.
Also, just be that Sacramento is just, I don't know, they just kind of lost it because I haven't really been, once we do their offseason, like
Yeah,
it's
spoiler F.
yeah, it's kind of hard to really see the logic to me in most of the moves that they've kind of pulled off in the last, year or so.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
Yeah, so maybe they're just I don't know, but maybe they just have no idea what they're really doing. But um, it's right now it's kind of just close. It's not the worst possible scenario, but it's pretty close. Where it's like with the Kaminga thing, it's like if you bring him back, what are you gonna get out of him? Does he want to be there now? But also for him, if he doesn't bring his best, he may not get whatever money he's looking for. Maybe a team pays him anyways, but you don't know. Like nobody really wants the qualifying offer because if it's a qualifying offer, you can't trade him, and then also he would just be able to walk, right? But then if you're Kaminga and you sign a deal with Golden State, then you're still kind of locked there for a while. And we know when he comes back, he's not going to have a significant role. Maybe he'll play, but he's not going to have whatever role he's looking for. And it's a shame because, again, on paper, he seems like a type of player that you would want to have in Golden State, where it's like it's a young guy that can give you some offense, that's a really good athlete. But it just seems like it hasn't worked out defensively. He's not great. And just a lot of the little things he doesn't do. We've talked about that before, but it's unfortunate because they really haven't fared well at all with the two timelines thing. I mean, they drafted Wiseman, pretty much sold low on him, got back Gary Payton the second, right? Who probably will come back to Golden State, but that's not what you'd want. It's like Okoro, right? Like you don't want to trade a top 5 pick for a role player, and that's what happened with Wiseman. And then with Kaminga, any of these type of deals, you're selling low. I mean, like again, Monk's a decent return, but most of the other ones, it's like, it's like, I mean, yeah, okay, it's more quote unquote depth and better players, but it's still not really like a talent upgrade. So I don't know. You're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, and I don't really know what happens there. I mean, you've mainly been steadfast about him not coming back. You still think he's not coming back?
Yeah, I don't think he comes back. There's no shot.
Just you think it's probably just one of those two teams, and they just eventually come to terms on a deal?
Mm-hmm. Probably Phoenix.
Fair enough. Which team do you think should want him more?
Phoenix. They should want him more for sure because you want to prioritize young talent at this point. So you gotta get as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens, and then whenever Golden State gets that done, then they can do they can get their offseason underway because everybody's been saying like, hey, there's guys that are basically that have basically verbally committed to the team, but they can't go there because they have to figure out the Kuminga stuff first. So all this is holding up their offseason, which I don't think is a good way to go into the following season when you're still trying to contend and potentially compete for the championship. I know you and I don't really think they're going to win the title, but it's just you'd like to be in a better spot than this.
Yeah.
But if they can turn that into, a couple role players and you get Kuminga and a Horford, Seth Curry, Peyton Melton. I mean, that's a decent offseason. I still wouldn't pick them to win the West, but that's better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then uh last but not least, as we normally do, we'll get into, our normal polling and our normal comments that we do. So on IG, our last post was basically tied to the Knicks, right? And it was, will the Knicks make the finals? And it was 50-50. 50-50 on yes, no, they will make the finals. And again, it speaks volumes about how I think there's a lot of people who like the Knicks. We like the Knicks roster. But there's also people who feel like, well, it's kind of hard to just pencil in a team as like an obvious choice to make the finals in the Eastern Conference. People have mentioned Cleveland, but we had questions about them too. So I think this makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand why it's split like that, but yeah, I think New York is talented enough. They've got a plethora of talent on the roster. They got a little bit deeper as well. So I think there's a case.
Yeah. And then we also had a comment on that Instagram post from 2X Tims. And they said, the Knicks got no excuse not to make it out of the East. But watch out, the East is up in the air at this point. Let the 76ers, Magic, Pistons, or Hawks make a couple moves. The East can probably be competitive, even if Boston, Indiana, and Milwaukee are going to be trash this season, which is kind of basically like what we, which kind of basically what we said. So, like, I think we both agree with that, where, yeah, the East is kind of up in the air. There are teams that you can see are clearly better than others, but those other teams that are lower, could be better, and they could challenge those teams. Even though on paper you do feel like there is at least a little bit of a hierarchy.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be weird, but I think those teams that he mentioned are probably going to take the spots of Milwaukee and whoever else, Indiana as well. So
yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Off Ball Takes podcast. Again, let us know your thoughts on the Denver Nuggets as well as the Cleveland Cavaliers offseason, whether or not you think they improved, whether or not you think that they are inching themselves closer to the title. And of course, let us know your thoughts on Skinny Luka. And also let us know your thoughts on the Kuminga situation. Of course, like we just read out, if you want to join these IG polls, just go on at the OBT podcast on Instagram, right? We always post there. Go on our other socials as well if you want to check out our content, and leave a comment on our YouTube shorts or videos as well, and we'll read it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've gotten a number of subscribers over the last few weeks, so clearly people like the content we're pushing out, so we're going to keep doing that. We appreciate all the support. We'll see you next episode.